If you have not been here before, this is our manual testers group. We are a subgroup under QA to Point, the umbrella. Manual testers are necessary and important. So we hold this group as a community space so that we can learn, share, and present techniques for each other, fellow testers in the manual QA community. Our focus is on increasing skill set and learning new tools. Our next workshop is going to be May 5th. It's going to be Brandon Ashton, and he will be presenting on console DevTools. We're always looking for volunteers to speak on topics they're passionate about or anything they want to learn. So if you have any ideas, you can reach out to Jeff Meyer or myself on Slack at the QA at the Point workspace under the Manual Tester Slack channel. Tonight, we have our wonderful guest speaker, Abhinav Yadav. He's a UX designer too at Lucid. I personally work with him on my team and I love him. And he's going to be talking about UX and QA, an early and ongoing relationship. So I will go ahead and let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Kim, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you so much for allowing me to, share my experience with everyone here. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. So I'll be going over this short presentation, and I just wanted to share my experience, and I will also ask Kim to chime in between to share her experiences as well. But the purpose of this talk is to be more of a discussion. So I'd be going over a few slides, I'd be telling you my experiences, but you're also welcome to share your experiences, especially if you work with UX designers. I'd be happy to get your perspective as well. So with that, hello everyone, and let me introduce myself. So hi, my name is Abhinav. I am originally from India. I have worked as a user experience designer for 6 years, and I worked in India and the US. I've worked in different industries like banking, education. I've worked with startups. I've worked with very large enterprises as well. Right now I'm working at Lucid on Lucid's flagship product, Lucid Chart, as a UX designer too. And something which I do when I'm not working is like usually I'm exploring good on my motorcycle, taking pictures, or most of the time I'm just playing games on my Xbox. Let's look at the agenda that we have for tonight. So first I'll be going over the design process because I am not so sure if everyone understands like how us user experience designers work the way we do. So we'll be taking a brief look at that. The second part is I'll be reflecting on the QA partnership that I've had over the last year, and that was the first time where I did something like that. So that was pretty interesting, and I have a few examples to share from that. The last part is how can we nurture and enrich this QA UX partnership going forward. There are a few recommendations that we have, but we would also be curious to hear your perspective as well. So let's look at the design process from an overview. So as a user experience designer, whenever I am given a problem, this is the process I follow, more or less. And the idea is that we are always given a problem, and we try to define that problem into something which is tangible, which is agreed upon by all the stakeholders that we are working with, and then we come up with a solution. So these are the broad steps, but how do we come up with a solution from the problem? So usually whenever we are given a problem, and usually that problem is given to us by product managers, we work with the product managers to do user research, where we would employ a bunch of research methods, like we would do interviews with our existing users. We would look at the market and analyze how our competitors are solving a problem. And once we have all of that research data, we analyze that and we synthesize that. And we usually come up with a bunch of themes which help us define what exactly is the problem that we are solving. That definition of the problem is shared with all the stakeholders that we work with, because it helps all of us align and unify towards this one goal that all of us want to achieve. And once we have that alignment, we go into this development phase where we come up with prototypes, um, and then we test those prototypes with users. We get the feedback, and then based on the feedback, we would iterate on these prototypes. And after a certain point, we come up with one solution or two solutions, and we then hand it off to our engineers who would actually make it. And then that would be the product that you QAs get to test. Now we call this a double diamond design process. And the reason is that, if you see these parallelograms, what happens is that every time we are given a problem, first we diverge and we come up with a lot of ideas. And sometimes there are a lot of bad ideas as well. So we weed out those ideas by research, then we come up with the problem statement. Then when we go towards prototyping, we create multiple prototypes or multiple designs. And after testing, we converge on the final solution. However, like most things in life, that process only exists in the ideal world. When you're working at an organization, you work with a lot of constraints. So a lot of times when we are working on a problem, the problems are very abstract. And sometimes if we are working in a specific domain, so for example, I was working on Lucid's product, Lucid Scale last year. And the product is actually meant for cloud architects to visualize their cloud architecture. So half of the time when I was working on a problem, most of my effort was going into understanding the domain and then actually concentrating on the problem. And there are other things as well, like for example, there are technical constraints, there are design system constraints, and design being subjective, you get a lot of overlapping input from a lot of stakeholders. So as a designer, what can I do to, help me minimize these effects so I can concentrate more on my job and I can concentrate more on the design process? I think one of the things I've realized in the past year is to do more horizontal collaboration. So the idea here is that, as product meaning product design, product management, and user experience designers can collaborate with QAs and engineering early on so that, we have this very inclusive process where we involve everyone, where we involve everyone from the very beginning, whenever we are working on a given problem. Now, that was a very abstract idea. I'd be going over a few of my experiences from last year, especially when I was working on Lucid Scale, which is, like I mentioned earlier, is one of Lucid's product. And we started this QA UX collaboration early in 2021. Now, this was something which was suggested to us by a senior product manager, Kevin Ellsworth, who said that, hey, like a lot of times we get interesting ideas and perspectives from QAs, but often we get these ideas when we have made the product, when it's already, the code is already there, the product is alive, and it's too late to make any big changes. So can we do something where we involve the QAs early on the design process? So I started doing that, and I started realizing that, it is also helping me a lot. So for example, by doing this, I was able to save a lot of time and effort by closing the communication gap between me and my QA. So earlier, what used to happen was that I used to work on a given problem with the product manager, come up with a solution, hand it off to the engineer who would then actually code that, and then it would be tested by a QA. If the QA will have some questions about the user flows, or maybe I made a certain design and they have some questions about that, they would have to come through the developer to talk to me. So usually what used to happen was that the QA, you would give that feedback in something like GitHub or Bitbucket, and then my engineer would give that feedback to me, acting as a mediator. And this was something which was not efficient. Like I didn't have access to Bitbucket, so I didn't understand how would that work. And my engineer was spending a lot of time just being a bridge between my QA. Just being a bridge between the QA and me. So I realized that if we are talking to each other early on, a lot of times my QA would just ping me on Slack. We would have a conversation about a design decision and I would provide them the rationale. And when they are testing, they understand that, why a certain design decision was made and what they need to test for. So I'll be taking a quick pause here. And if there are any questions or if anyone has any experience to share, we'd be happy to go over that. And at this silence, I'll assume that that's my cue to move to the next slide. All right. Another thing which was a benefit for me was that I discovered edge cases early on in the process. And this is something which we designers try to do as much as possible when we are trying to create a design for a given problem. We try to think in a divergent manner and come up with multiple ideas and edge cases that what if a user does this, what if a user does that? But even with all our imagination, we are limited to what we can think and what we can solve for. So I realized that my QAs were a very important asset to me in terms of helping me identify these edge cases early on, because as QAs, all of you are adept at identifying these edge cases that, what if a user clicks here, what happens that, what if they drag something which they're not supposed to. So engaging with my QAs early on, they used to look at my designs and they used to point out these edge cases. So rather than waiting for this whole process to happen where I would give a design to an engineer and then they would make it and then the QA would find those things later on, I was able to create designs for these edge cases very early on. And to give a more concrete example, we use this open source library called I18N, and we use that for internationalization where we translate a product UI into other languages. And one time I made this design where I had made the design very specific to a design system. It had everything, it was solving the problem, it was looking good. But when my QA looked at it, he told me that, hey, the button you have created, it doesn't have enough space. So when this design is translated to German, there's a chance that the button text may overflow and you would have this weird situation where the design would look broken. So that was a really interesting call out to me because first of all, when they called it out, I was able to, since then I've been able to put more concentrations into these kind of use cases. And it helped me avoid this whole feedback loop where this problem would have come to me after the whole implementation, but I was able to fix it earlier. And that saved a lot of time and effort for me and for the engineering team as well. Now, this is something which I feel may just be very unique to Lucid and how we work. So most of the QAs that I work with, even though they are assigned a particular product team, they do work with other products as well. And in many cases, they understand their products more than the product teams themselves in many cases. So a lot of times when I was working on Lucid Scale, I was working on a specific problem and I used to show my solutions to my QA. They used to tell me that, oh, hey, by the way, another designer and one of our sister products was dealing with the same problem and they dealt with the problem in a same way. So why don't you contact them and, just, save time and effort on that. So that helped me not reinvent the wheel again and again, because a lot of times when you're working on similar enough products, like in our case, you're given the same kind of problems, and instead of working on them again, you can just reach out to someone, and a QAs acted as a bridge between these different products and these different teams. The fourth learning for me was that QAs used to organize these swarm testing sessions. So this is something which was pretty new for me because that's something which I've not experienced in my career as a UX designer. So this was a pretty interesting way where everyone from QA department, from engineering and product used to come together, and we used to test out our product based on certain user flows which our QA has decided. And while going through those, as UX designers, we used to call out certain issues that we were seeing with the product, and that would help our QA peers understand why we are suggesting certain changes and a rationale behind suggesting those changes. And it would also help us understand how a QA tests a product, what are their perspectives, and how we can be better partners. The last one is scalability. This was something which I was talking about to a QA worked with, like Zach Rowley, who works at Lucid Scale. And he pointed out this interesting aspect that, a lot of times QAs know about the product more than anyone, like they know the product inside out. So every time when product management and UX is coming up with new ideas for a feature, QAs are a really good resource to help us identify that, hey, if you're introducing this new cool and shiny thing, this is how it can clash with our existing features. And sometimes they, like Kim here would ask me questions that you're introducing this, how will this fit in with our existing features? How will it interact with them? So it helps me understand these use cases, and it helps me create scalable designs without actually putting in a lot of effort from my own side. Like once these things are surfaced to me, it helps me understand that, oh, these are the things where my designs can break. So these are the things which I can do to preempt that. Okay. All right, so coming to some recommendations on how we can nurture and enrich this QA UX partnership. Oh, I'm sorry. For some reason, my Alexa decided to interject. But I guess like these recommendations apply to anyone who works with the UX, and they also apply to someone who is, just the sole QA and like they don't work with any designers. So one of the recommendations I would make is to add usability and accessibility heuristics as part of the QA process. Now, I'm not so sure if this is something that already happens at a lot of companies, and a lot of QAs already do that. But as designers, whenever we design something, we broadly follow these 10 rules or 10 heuristics of good user experience design. And these rules were created by this user experience consultancy group called Nielsen and Norman. And while I'm not going to go in details of these rules, I'll talk about a few of these. So every time I'm designing something, I would think about rule 1, which talks about visibility of system status. And what this means is that every time you design any kind of digital interface, a user should be able to know what's going on in any given moment. So even if you're encountering an error or if something else is going on, you should let the user know that, hey, we are like working on something. Or if they did something, let them know that, they performed an action which created or which did something. Another one is like user control and freedom. So this is about, can I undo something if I did something wrong? So the idea is that, let's say I am importing something like some huge data set in a software, and I click on import, but the data set is so huge that my system has gone irresponsive. So can I do some kind of, can I design something where I can give the control back to the user so they can cancel the process and they can get back to whatever they were doing? The fourth one is like pretty simple. It's straightforward that we should strive for consistency and we should like adhere to the design system. But yeah, like if you would, I think like, making these rules as part of your testing checklist would help you spot for a lot of errors or like some like use cases which a user experience designer might have skipped when they were designing that solution. Another recommendation is testing with users. So usually how it works is that, whenever you're testing any software or like any product, you're testing that in an isolated environment. And sometimes that is very crucial. But I think another aspect to this would be to actually test the product with users, because a lot of times, apart from user experience designers, everyone else who is working as part of the product team, like be it engineering or QA, they barely get any face time with the users. And I think it's very crucial for you to get that face time with the user so you can empathize with them and you can see how users actually use a product. Because as people who work in this digital industry, we have certain assumptions that we make that, oh, this is how a user may be using things. And I am someone who does that on a regular basis. But every time in a user call, I'm just surprised how people use a product. And it just blows my mind that, this is something which I could have never imagined that a user would be using a product in a certain way. So I feel that, being part of the sessions, maybe you can, if you work with UX, maybe you can reach out to them and ask them that, hey, can we do a collaborative session where we test the product with an actual user? Maybe if you don't have a user experience designer, you can probably reach out to your customer support team and they can help you out with this as well. Another thing is to be more involved early on. And to quote, Zach, one of the QA I work with, he says that, whenever a QA sees a flow early on, it improves the quality of testing because they're familiar with the flow that they're familiar with the flow already, and then they can spend their time creatively testing and finding edge cases or other bugs. So this is something which I reflected on in my experience with Lucid Scale, that, engaging with QA early on helped me a lot. And I think it can also help QAs a lot in terms of understanding what use cases they are testing and why those use cases or flows were created in a specific way. Because a lot of times what happens is that, a list is sent to the QAs that, hey, this is what you have to test. But usually the rationale behind those decisions is not conveyed. And a lot of times QAs have a lot of great ideas based on, like their experience and their own creativity, and like being involved early on helps us understand those ideas, and it also helps like your voice getting through. Now, this is something, if you work with designers, probably I would encourage you to go up to them and probably, ask them that how they can involve you early on in the design process, how they can involve you to be a more collaborative member. So this is something which is a recent change for me as well. Most of my career, I've worked with like waterfall models. I've worked with design agencies where we didn't follow Agile that much. The idea was that a client used to give us a problem. We used to define the problem, come up with prototypes, test that, and then come up with a solution. That solution would then be handed off to the client's engineers, who would then make the product. Sometimes we would test it, sometimes we won't test it. And that's the way it used to work. So a lot of times even we didn't know that if we propose a solution, if it actually worked or not. However, working at Lucid, I've realized that, creating a design process that is more agile friendly is very helpful for us designers, because rather than working so much and hypothesizing that, oh, this may work, this may not work, we can come up with phases and we can come up with MVPs, which can help us understand that, oh yeah, like this is how users are reacting to whatever we have proposed, what course correction we need to make so that the next time we release like V1 or V2, we have fixed those issues. Now I'll invite Kim to like go over this part, because we have been working closely together on a few features, and this is the approach we are taking, and so far it's been working out for us.
Yeah. So it's valuable for QA to have discussions with UX and the product manager around what features will be included in the different phases of the release product, starting with the minimum viable product and determining what will be included in the later releases, like version 2, version 3, based on user needs, business goals, and development priorities. And I find this extremely beneficial to everyone, the user, the team, QA for testing, just to kind of understand and communicate what we plan to deliver, and is that parallel to what would be the best introduction to the user. So what's priority, what's something that could come out in a later release? What do we want to be included when we're first presenting this to the user? And we can be the most efficient this way, and then just log polished tickets for later on that we figure are nice to have rather than need to have. That can come out in like version 2 or version 3 that will improve the experience, but is not necessary to give that user the delight first coming out of the gate. So it's really nice to have these discussions in planning, inside meetings, maybe in Slack, just even like during testing, like testing the MVP or version 1. And kind of deciding if that needs to be adjusted as you go along, because Agile's awesome and you adjust as you go. But yeah, this is, I feel like the collaboration in order to understand what kind of chunks should come out and how they should come out is really important. Thanks, Abhinav.
Thank you, Kim. Another thing which I read in an article, and that is linked in this presentation, so I'll share this presentation once we are done. Another thing which I realized can be a really good thing was to pair up with the UX designers. And I think in this article, they call this out that a QA and a UX can look at something and can look at a product from very different perspectives. And that can help in creating a very delightful and very polished product. So this is like very true from my own experiences. For example, like Kim here is very good at understanding how, if you're introducing something new, how it can like break things which already exist. Also things about, thinking about responsiveness, like once we have a product on an iPad or a mobile phone, where it's breaking or where it can break. And from a UX perspective, I can inform you that, hey, like this is why we need to like create a certain flow, because this is actually valuable for the user and they would find it delightful. So I think like this kind of pairing can be really successful because you have two different perspectives. Like a user experience designer is looking at the user flow picture, and the QA is like looking at all the points where something can break, and can help designers like me create solutions which are like well-rounded, and they are like like polished as much as possible. Now I'd like to hand it off to Kim again to speak about this more.
Yeah. QA pair testing with UX gives more insight towards user flow, functionality, and possible edge cases the user will run into, allowing UX to design or update mocks based on that obtained knowledge. This was introduced to me very early on at Lucid. The UX designer had actually approached me because she was just curious about the product and how it looked as a user and just poking around. And so she had asked me very informally, hey, is it okay if we just sit down and poke at the product together? And then we ended up finding like dark mode and other things that we need to consider. And I thought it was such a great idea. And I didn't even know UX was willing to do something like that. Just sit down with QA out of curiosity and just improve the approach going forward, and improve designs and mocks based on us kind of going through the flow together and seeing what the parameters were, and maybe any negative testing we would run into, and considering that. So it was extremely valuable, and I really held on to that going forward. So I think it's something all manual testers should consider.
Thank you, Kim. And I think this is the last point, which is actually meant for designers, but I realize I'm the only designer here. But if you work with designers, I would encourage you to go up to them and ask them if they can share resources with you. Like if you have a design system, can they share the documentation with you? Because a lot of times small things like, if you have guidelines around voice and tone, or like how you write copy, how do you communicate with user? If you are aware of that, I think that would help you enrich your testing process, because you can catch on to not only the visual bugs, the behavioral bugs, but also bugs in terms of like tone and how you actually communicate to the customer. It's also very beneficial for us as designers to involve QAs early on, because once we actually explain the flows to you and we explain our vision to you, I think it's good to have another advocate on your side early on. And we can have this like really interesting collaborative partnership where I can enrich my process uh, without like worrying about where it can fail. So I think that's all I had to say. I have included a few of the articles that I referenced, and I also have, like, linked everyone's LinkedIn. So if you want to like get in touch with anyone, feel free to do that. And we'll be sharing this presentation as a PDF. So thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, we are open to that.